Welcome to Pateo Television. My name is Johan Oldenkamp, and I am, among other things, a professor of archaeology at the Pateo Academia for Holy Science. In this 43rd episode of Pateo TV, we will talk about the previous equator, because the current equator has not always been the equator. This is the globe that we know and how she is rotating around her own axis, and the equator position is about here. So every point that comes around here is on the equator. That means the current equator. Now I made it with a red line, so all spots on this red line are more or less on the equator. And this is what we know now. But the main question I'm answering in this video is if this was always the case. And I already give you the answer, no, this is not always the case. Let me switch off my camera. Because this is the real equator before our current one got into position. So this is the previous one. And in our current map of our planet, it looks like a sine wave. But this sine wave, all the positions on this sine wave, they are at the original or the previous equator. And yeah, we can also refer to it as the tipped equator, but that's from our current understanding. Actually, the current equator is the tipped one, but I'll come back to that. Here you see the previous equator as a straight line, and all the positions on this straight line, they are at the previous equator. So here we see the previous situation, and all the spots here are on the previous equator. And this is how we now experience our home planet. And the line here in the middle, that is the current equator. But that's not the only difference. The actually even more difference with the current situation is the fact that the planet now is tilted. It wasn't tilted before that. So there are two major differences nowadays. First of all, it's tilted with about 23.5 degrees. And secondly, the line in the middle is not the same anymore. And if you want to know when this happened, because I now only talk about the places, the ancient cities and so on, but if you want to know the timing, then you can read that in this book. It's an e-book, Chronicles of the Gods. And all the text on which the conclusions are based are in this e-book. And to make it more accessible, there is also an accompanying video which shows all the pictures and shows you the timeline and exactly what happens with animations as well. And you can only buy them together. So if you buy the e-book, you automatically get the video and vice versa. And the main question is, of course, what is it worth? My experience is that when I put videos like the one you're watching now for free on the internet, most people don't really value it. So why should I do that? I think what I'm doing, my work, is not worthless. So if it's worth something to you, then maybe you can appreciate it. I ask a little bit of money for it, but if you think that is too much or you cannot afford it, then simply contact me and we find a solution. More on this you find on this website, Pateo.nl. And there's a lot of information in, for instance, English. So this is the previous equator, and all the names here refer to places on this line, this previous equator. Yeah, the red line here is the previous one, and also here. I'll come back to this. And what I will do now in this video is we go around the globe in 80 images. Not in 80 days, not in 80 minutes, no, in 80 images, for instance, photos. Yeah, we go to Peru, then we go to Algeria, Egypt, Vietnam, Thailand, India, Burma, Vanuatu, Easter Island, and then we come back. That is the trip that we are doing in this video. So fasten your seatbelts because it's going to be a really nice one, I think. We start here. Our trip starts here in Peru. Yeah, we start first here near the coast of Peru, because not too far away from the coast, there we find the Nazca lines. Yeah, again, you see the red line here. That's the original equator, or at least the previous one. And you see it here too. And then later we go to Machu Picchu, and we also go to Cusco, and we go to a small area a little bit north of Lima. So that's what we do in Peru. First, we start with the fascinating lines, the Nazca lines. And why were they depicted? And what does it mean? Yeah, many questions. Here you can see all these remarkable images. Mostly there are animals. So what does it mean? Well, my conclusion is that our ancestors in this region depicted the star signs, but they don't use the ones that we nowadays use in the way that we know them, and that's all from ancient Sumer. No, they created their own images based on these stars. And I will focus on one of them, and it's called the spider. Yeah, and you can find them all in between Nazca and Pisco. Yeah, you can even go into an airplane and fly on top of it and see it, because there you can see it best from the sky. And that's, of course, remarkable. Here you see them all one by one. They have names and how long they are. But the one we're going to focus now is the spider, which is almost 50 meters long. So it's very big. And it looks like this from the top. Yeah, with legs and all kinds of strange things. But what is it? Why would you depict a giant spider like this? Well, my conclusion is it was a representation of the constellation of Orion. It's not a perfect match, sorry, but I think it's close enough. So it's just a guess, but I think they depicted the star signs. Now we go to Machu Picchu, ancient city, yeah, very high, and it was only discovered in 1912, so not too long ago, yeah, about a century ago. And then it looked like this. Nowadays it's much more fresh, so to say, and cleaned up, and nowadays it looks like this, but it's still fascinating. Yeah, it must have been beautiful to have lived there. But what do we find there? Well, we find ancient construction techniques like these. And of course, the builders were very lucky to find a stone like this, which fits perfectly with the other stones. If you think that our ancestors used copper tools to cut these stones very precise to make them fit perfectly, then you better stop watching this video, because that's complete and utter nonsense. Yeah, this is proof of ancient technology. And our ancestors were not primitive at all. Otherwise, they could not have made this, because this is a perfect fit. And this is a clear proof of ancient cultures that had high developed advanced technology for building. And this stone building, stone wall, is very strong. Earthquakes cannot destroy it. So that's why they used it. It's an extremely strong way of making a wall or whatever, construction. And of course, later on, the people who came later to the region continued to build, but they didn't have those techniques to cut the stone this precise. This is probably a laser. So they created something that more or less looked like it, but this is, of course, everybody can do this. So this is not advanced. But a stone cutting like this and making it fit perfectly like this, that is advanced. So what did our ancestors do? Well, when they arrived, they started building in their own way on top of the remains. And for instance, this doorway is much older than the walls we see to the left and the right, and also on top. So that's what has been done ever since. And that's why it's so difficult to date all these structures. I'm not going to talk about the dating here because it's a lot of debate about it. What I'm doing is I'm just showing you that all these ancient sites lie on the same line. Yeah, you can see the same here. This part is much older than the part on top. This is a remain of something else. And then the people who came to live there much later continue building in their own way. If you can't see the difference, then this video is not for you. Now we go to Cusco, a little bit more south. Yeah, this is not on the line, but you can see the same technique, the same building technique here. Yeah, for instance, this stone, I think it has 12 sides. So how can you find a stone like this, which fits perfectly? Of course, you can't find a stone, you have to make a stone like this. And that's part of this giant wall, which still exists. How old is this wall? Well, nobody can give you a good answer. But my conclusion is it's more than 5,000 years old. Yeah, the same here. You see ancient structures at the bottom with the ancient construction technique, very advanced. And then, yeah, much more primitive on top. So there was an advanced culture, and then later primitive cultures continued to build there. We think that we are developing from very primitive to more advanced. Well, that's not true. Yeah, maybe there are cycles, but there were previously very advanced cultures. Maybe not in our way advanced, but they certainly had advanced techniques to create stone walls like this, extremely strong. Yeah, another example. I hope I get the message through now. Yeah, for instance, this stone, you must be very lucky to find a stone like that that fits perfectly. So we've been to the Nazca lines here, Machu Picchu, we had a little excursion to Cusco, and now we go a little bit north of Lima, the capital of Peru. And we go to the city of Caral, the ancient city, or the ancient place of Caral. Here you see Caral. And there is, yeah, a kind of sacred place in the sense that there were ancient pyramids. And they were built by a culture that was much older than previously was known. At least 2,900 years before our current era, these pyramid structures were created. And that fits perfectly with my theory. So it all makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it started here as it started in other places too, in ancient Khemit. It started in ancient Sumer. It's all after the so-called flood. So now we exit Peru and we go towards Africa. Yeah, we cross Brazil, we cross the Atlantic Ocean, and now we enter the African continent. And we go, of course, to the Gizeh Plateau. Yeah, as another depiction, same line. This is the previous equator line. And this is a very important point on that line. Yeah, you can call it the heart. And of course, exactly at the heart, we find the Great Pyramid. So isn't that remarkable? But before we arrive there, we first go to Algeria, the southern part of Algeria, because there is Tassili Niajer, and that means plateau of the rivers. Well, there are not many rivers nowadays in Algeria, because this is all referring to a time long before the desert got into existence. Before it became a desert, it was filled with life. It was extremely green, but nothing is left over of that anymore. So there were also rivers, and there was a gigantic lake, or actually a sea, in the north of Africa, long time ago. And somehow these people reminded or somehow got knowledge of it. And here you see exactly on that line Tassili min Ajer. And now we enter Egypt. And Egypt was called Khemit in the old days. Khemit means the black land. And first we go to the Siwa oasis. And then we go to Giza. And then later on we go to Petra. That's already beyond ancient Khemit of Egypt. This is near the Siwa oasis, and it's called Shali Gadi, and that means remote Shali. So it was far away, in the middle of nowhere, you can say, but it is an so-called sacred site, very special. And that is why Alexander the Great, officially he was known Alexander III of Macedon, but we know him all as Alexander the Great. He went to that place because he heard a rumor that there was a grave, or a tomb actually, a tomb of Hermes, as he called him, or Thoth, as the ancient Khemitians named him. And what is true about the story is of course not really clear, but it is clear that he found this, a very remarkable stone, actually an emerald tablet with special writing. And this was actually the start of what we now call Hermetic science. And also Gnosticism is based on this. So, and he claims it was in the tomb of Thoth, or tomb of Hermes. Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice greatest Hermes. So now we enter here at the heart, so to say, in Giza Plateau. And there, of course, we find these beautiful buildings, the pyramids. And I think these are the most fascinating buildings. This is at least the highlight of the tour, the height of the tour, the most important point. And this is how they look like from on top. I made previous videos about this. If you've not seen them, simply search on the internet on the Glock of Giza, and there you will see there's much more to tell about all this. But the Great Pyramids you see here on the right hand side is exactly on that line. Now we continue with the previous equator, and now we go to this black dot here. That's Petra, and Petra means stone. And still there is the rose red city of Petra. Very fascinating to see. And then we go to the ancient city of Ur in Mesopatamia, or Sumer. And probably it looked like this. We're not sure how exactly it looked like, but this is an artist's impression. And this ancient city of Ur was also exactly on the previous equator. And the same is true for the city that was named Persepolis by the Greeks, and actually literally means the city of the Persians. And this is how it looks like nowadays. So it's a beautiful sight to go there and to get some idea how it could have looked like in the past. And now we go to Pakistan, to Mohenjo-Daro. The black dots, that's where we go now. It's in the province of Sindh. And there we find this ancient site. Yeah, again, I'm not talking about the dates because most of the things are built afterwards, but the sites have been on this line since since long time, and that is why our ancestors built these structures there, probably on top of the remains of older structures. So this is the previous equator, the red line that you can see here. We've been already to these places, to the Gizeh Plateau, to Petra, to Ur, to Persepolis, and now shortly to Mohenjo-Daro, and now we continue towards India. And here we find the Madhya Pradesh, almost in the heart of the north of India, with the Khajuraho. And this is a very famous temple, Kandarija Mahadeva Temple, that's the name. And it is actually a reference to the great god of the cave, also a reference to ancient times. But most people know this region for depictions like these ones, these statues. At the Pateo Academia for Holy Science, we use this for sexual education, both theory and practice. And now we continue to the land of Myanmar, also known as Burma, and to Pija. And there is an ancient PU city of Sri Kestra. And of course, this is not 5,000 years old, but it is built here because it was exactly on that line, built on the remains. Now we move on to Thailand, to Sukhothai, and there we find nowadays an historical park, and I think it's very beautiful. And also this historical park of Sukhothai is exactly on the previous equator. So again, the same story here. It is an ancient site, and that is why later generations built all kinds of structures or temples or whatever on top of that same location. Now we go to Cambodia, the Preah Vihear temple. And here you can see it. And it's a very strange temple because it has its entrance to the north, and it's very unusual. So also this temple is exactly on the previous equator. And Angkor Wat is also a very famous spot on this ancient equator, on this previous equator. And it's near Siem Reap in Cambodia. And this is how the Angkor Wat temple looks nowadays. Yeah, I'm not saying, to make it really clear, I'm not saying this is 400, 5,000 years old, because it's not. But the spot is very important, and that's why our ancestors built this temple on top of remains of older buildings. This is a very impressive temple complex of Angkor Wat. And now we go in the direction of the Pacific. This red line now is going straight onto the Pacific, and it tips on a lot of islands there. But eventually it goes straight through the middle of one island. That's a small one. It's called Aneityum, or also it's named Aneityum. And it's part of the Vanuatu island group. Yeah, it also touches New Guinea, but it's not exactly through the middle, more on the south of it. But it goes exactly through the middle of this very small island, and that's why it is mentioned here. Here you can see the Aneityum Island, if you see it clearly, very tiny spot here. This is Australia. So here you can see it's very small, and these islands are all part of the Vanuatu group. So here you see that straight line coming in. You can't even see the small island here on this map, but on this map it's more clear. Yeah, you see the Australia, and the last one, the most to the south, that's the island I'm talking about now, Aneityum, and it's going straight through that island you see here in this enlargement. And also there we find ruins. So I think the oldest structures here must be about 5,000 years or more old. And now our journey is nearly completed, because this is the depiction we also saw at the beginning. And our last stop before we're back in Peru is Rapa Nui. And that island was later renamed by a Dutch sailor as Easter Island, but that's a little bit silly. I prefer to still name it Rapa Nui. And of course we find there the very famous statues. How old are these statues? The official story to me doesn't make any sense at all, because it's impossible to make these statues with primitive tools. No doubt about that. And some are extremely tall. The average is 4 meters or 13 feet of all those statues found there. And the average weight is 14,000 kilograms or 14 ton. But yeah, you can see this one is even taller than that. So how were the so-called primitive people able to make these stones, and why did they put them so deep in the ground? All questions where mainstream archaeology has no answers to. But my conclusion is, based on my own research, these statues are much older than we are told. And they were not made by the people who came to live there. And also here on Rapa Nui, we find the same construction technique. So this can only be done when you're able to cut stone very precisely, because this is extremely tight. Yeah, you cannot put your credit card into one of these sections because they are too tight together. So how can you make a structure like that with primitive tools? That's impossible. So my conclusion is this wall is much older than 5,000 years. So this was our tour. We went through all these ancient sites. Yeah, and again, not all the structures we find there now are more than 5,000 years old, but the original buildings there, the foundations, they are very old. And it might even be older than 6,000 or 7,000 years. But the journey has not ended yet, because there is a spot that we skipped over, and that's here in the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, the north eastern part of Brazil. That spot, there is now nothing, it's only water, but there used to be something. And that is also on the map made by this man. We nowadays name him Piri Reis, and he lived in the most in the 16th century. And his maps are fascinating. Yeah, this is a map that he made, and we can see all the spots on his map. They are exactly corresponding to positions we nowadays know are part of South America and even Mesoamerica. So this map is very accurate. And why would he then depict something here in the Atlantic Ocean? I hope you can see it. Yeah, this is the same map, but now it's pointed in the direction that it was drawn, probably. No, that's not correct, but anyway, I'm showing you this place here because this is very remarkable. This island is no longer there, but it is on his map. And his map was drawn in the year 1513. And he was also able to draw a part of the lines of Antarctica, which is nowadays fully covered in ice, and probably in those days too. So how was he able to draw these things when they were not there? At least that's my conclusion. I don't think they were there in the 16th century, because I have not heard any story about this island. But it is on the map, so it must be meaningful. And it is very meaningful because it's exactly on that previous equator. And actually, I refer to that spot as Brazilian Atlantis. Yeah, it's of course not a real name, but I think it was part of Atlantis. Yeah, because Atlantis was somewhere here in the Atlantic Ocean, and maybe this island was part of Atlantis in those days. It's all guessing. Yeah, I can't have any. I don't have really proof for this, but I know it was on the map of Piri Reis. And what I also know is when we take this as one point, Giza as another point, Angkor Wat as a third point, Aneityum as a fourth point, and Rapa Nui as the fifth one. And then we see that these points are all have equal distances to each other, and actually they form a pentagram with the original North Pole exactly in the middle. So this cannot be a coincidence. Yeah, this is mathematically too geometrically too meaningful. So the original North Pole point of our planet, when the red circle here was the previous equator, the North Pole point was almost exactly where now is the city of Valdez in Alaska. So that was then the top of our planet. Nowadays it's here, and you can see this red line is going straight through that as well. So that's also remarkable. Yeah, so one of the lines of the pentagram is going straight through the current North Pole, but the heart of this pentagram is at the previous North Pole position. Yeah, so this is the previous equator, the red line, and the North Pole position was here. And you can't see it, but that is where nowadays we find the city of Valdez. And when you somehow take the skin of our home planet and you stretch the ends, then you get this. But this is actually the previous equator. And the other half is actually should go, not be visible, should be on the other side. But just for sake of clarity, it is also depicted here. Yeah, so this is not a real image from the top. This is what you get when you take the southern half and you stretch it out as far as possible. Hope you understand what I'm saying here. So for now, thank you very much for watching this episode of Pateo Television. I hope you have enjoyed it. And if you have enjoyed it, then please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like, then you get updates of new videos. And you can also connect with me via other social media as well. And you can visit my websites. Pateo.nl is a multilingual website with also information in other languages, like for instance French, German, Italian, Spanish, and there is an all English website called holyscience.org. For now, I thank you very much for watching this episode of Pateo Television. Namaste.